Some additional thoughts on digitization, the center, the joy, and the despair of my life. This is Jason Scott Talks His Way Out of It, a podcast about technology, history, and getting myself out of debt. Thanks to Peter Healy, Daniel Boyd, and the hundreds of other supporters on Patreon and elsewhere who have been supporting me and helping me get out of debt. Without question, the greatest time I have every morning is going to a few special collection searches that I have at the Internet Archive and seeing what's come in overnight. There are dozens of people working really hard on their own without compensation to bring in all sorts of new materials. Things like CD-ROM images, magazine scans, manual scans, and a slew of text and audio oddities that just start my day off right. They all have individual styles, these people. Some of them are simply transferring large collections buried out on the internet and making sure that the archive has a copy. Others are diligently pulling apart magazines, scanning them with the focus of a watchmaker, and bringing in top-quality versions of these obscure and sometimes nearly lost periodicals. In the case of audio items, I'm not a very discerning end user. If I start it up and it sounds pretty good, I'm happy. Like pirate radio stations or air checks from radio stations of the 60s and 70s, I'm happy. I can tell the work has been done, it's on the Internet Archive, and people can enjoy them immediately. In the case of scanned printed materials, I can tell a little more about them. As you can imagine, work like this is both demanding and really hard to justify the amount of time that goes into it. And I did ask, how long does it take an average magazine to go through this process? And the answer is hours. Processing and quality checks, touch-ups, make it absorb a notable amount of a day. If something is born digital, you get what you get. A PDF taken from a manufacturer's site, well, it is what it is. But there's so many factors when it comes to scanning. I've said it before, 600 DPI, either in a lossless format, PNG or TIFF, that's my style. Not everybody else approaches it that way. I've seen people upload 300 DPI. I've also seen people upload 4,800 DPI. It all depends where they're coming from and how much concern they have about getting it just right or good enough. Occasionally, somebody trying to be a hero uploads some very old PDFs of magazines that were scanned anywhere between 10 and 15 years ago. And that allows me to see exactly how far we've come. Nothing makes you more appreciative for a 300 DPI PNG scan than looking at a 50 megabyte PDF where, I'm not kidding, you actually can't even read the text. Many of these were a sold product on a CD-ROM that you could buy right at the beginning of the era of the commercial CD-ROM, and you were not being sold something great or permanent. By some arguments, in fact, it's actually anti-preservation, because the implication that things have been scanned and that the work is done means that folks have thrown out and gotten rid of magazines because they were under the assumption it was all handled. Where we are now in the present day is that there are a number of commercial scanners that you can buy, ranging from more focused on their own form factor all the way up to monstrosities that would cost you as much as a used car to be able to get into your house. I just recently bought a library scanner from the early 2000s that has the feature of what's called edge scanning, where, in theory, you can put a book or a magazine right up to the spine and only lose 2 millimeters of the inside margin. My experience, my testing shows that this probably works enough to be considered true, but you have to hope that whatever you're scanning doesn't even try to come close to the margin. Bringing it all to a bird's eye view, though, I am so delighted that folks see the value doing this thankless work. Magazines after 2006 are all available in digital editions from the get-go. That merely leaves millions from before that never had the chance to be turned digital. Once they're digital, we can do an awful lot. Advances in viewing and even some of the modern algorithmic magic will fill in the gaps in pictures and text to make them look even better than how they were scanned. In all of these cases, as long as the original is kept, the physical and digital versions, I'm fine with experimentation, modification, and folks taking things on to do some sort of restoration and make it better than it was. I love zooming in and finding the original flaws in the original printing, whether the magazine was 20 or 50 years old, where registration and the quality of the ink being used means that you now can go right down to the dot level and see what happened. Optical character recognition is getting better and better, and I have been searching for all sorts of terms when people ask about them or when I'm curious how something played in history, only to have it pop up in 10, 20, or 100 issues on the archive. Magazines and newspapers where I wouldn't have looked in a million years trying to find that specific name or that company. In these wake-up calls, these morning walks I take through the garden of the periodicals of the archive, dozens of magazines are waiting for me, hundreds of manuals and printed materials, and many, many CD-ROMs that I would have never thought would survive long enough to be imaged, scanned, and available to me. I know there's people out there who are sad when something they're specifically looking for isn't on the archive or available for them to find. The idea that everything is up now is a myth. We have a long, long way to go. Millions of individual printed items haven't made it into the digital world, but it's getting fixed every day. I have to say, with direct and wondrous clarity to everyone listening to me, that the buoyant and light-filled mornings that I have traipsing through the stacks of the Internet Archive are, bar none, my number one job perk, and a job perk that, unlike a lot of such perks, you can share yourself. In this time, especially this time, the present day, take advantage of what's at the archive. Go and find a subject, an obscure person, an idea that you once had, a place you remember or are curious about, and start doing a full-text search in our search bar. I assure you that you will take the first steps on a delightful and long journey, learning about places, subjects, and events that will fascinate you, and which, a day or two before, you would have thought were lost forever. Happy browsing, and good morning. This is Jason Scott Talks His Way Out of It. Thanks to James Bekoyanu, Forrest Fuqua, Mark Pilgrim, Corey Thomas, Emilio Oliveira, and Matt Reynolds, along with the hundreds of other supporters on Patreon and elsewhere who have been supporting me and helping me get out of debt. Never stop messing around. Never stop finding out.